All right, welcome back to Season 3, Episode 47 of the Outlap F1 Podcast. It's our COTA experience and this global motorsports survey episode. John, you probably had more experience at getting into this and diving into it. I think it came out actually while we were in the car.
Yeah.
I was driving and you were telling me about this survey. So why don't you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, I was trying to read through these 60 pages of data on my phone while we were in the car and stop and go.
Plenty of time.
Traffic. I'm surprised I didn't throw up just from from the traffic and looking at small print. But yeah, so we had the global motorsport survey. It's happened. It's been a few times, and I know it happened in 2015, 2017, and now again in 2021. So it's been interesting to see kind of how the numbers have changed across the last few years. But this year was actually their largest turnout ever. Which the number is actually not as large as I thought it would be when I first saw it. It's only 167,000 respondents across the world, but it is their largest ever, and I do think it gives F1 a good sample size from kind of overall. There were respondents from 187 different countries, people that speak 15 different languages. 57% of them were from Europe, which was actually down from 63% in 2017. Asia, Pacific, Middle East, and Africa doubled from the last survey, so they're now up to 21%. And then the U.S. made up an additional 21%, or the Americas, I should say, made up an additional 21% as well. So it's kind of interesting to see the split out there. Obviously, the UK is still, and Europe as a whole is still reigning, supreme when it comes to overall viewership and fanship. But kind of interesting to see how the other continents are starting to progress there. This was the youngest survey ever, so 34% of the respondents were under the age of 24, and 63% were under the age of 30. 34% were under 24, and 63% were under 34. So you've got, that's basically almost the entire population of respondents were in that age group there. And it was their highest female participation at 18.3%. So I thought that was pretty interesting. They had a lot of new fans, so 34% of the respondents said they've been following F1 for under 5 years. So a lot of people just in the last few years, probably in the Drive to Survive era, I would imagine, would be the biggest thing there. And then the survey itself made up 21.8 million different individual data points. So there was a ton of stuff for F1 to look at there. And you guys, if you got any thoughts, feel free to hop in anytime. But over half the respondents said the F1 was the motorsport that they followed most avidly, followed in second by World Endurance Championship and MotoGP. The fastest growing, and I think we just talked about Nashville, the fastest growing in support across the world is IndyCar, which is now at 28%, which was a pretty significant increase over the last survey. So,
it tells me they're doing something right.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's the biggest one being Grosjean, but I think you do see a lot of F1 talent kind of moving that direction and now kind of F2. But I think it's this kind of want desire, especially as F1's gained popularity, to kind of look for another. I don't know what drag race is happening outside my apartment right now.
The Hoboken Grand Prix.
Yeah.
Whoa!
Sounds like you got a mix of drag racing and like the New York 500 going on.
Yeah. I don't know what in the world is happening. Okay. Where was I? Oh, I was just, okay. So I feel like as F1 has gained popularity this last year, I think people are just also looking for another open wheel series, and IndyCar fills that spot. And it's a lot more competitive a lot of the time. So they really put on a great show out there, and apparently out on my street too as well.
I think you started to have the Alonso effect a couple of years there with the 500. I think that started just kicking it all, and then now you've got former F1 drivers that are full timing it. Obviously Grosjean, signing a big deal for a longer term deal going on there. So I think it's certainly to your point, Deanna, it's another thing. It's like, all right, F1's off, especially in the States. Now I've got 4 hours later, there's an Indy race. Like heck, put on some other open wheel racing. It's just the popularity has grown tremendously in F1 racing, especially in the United States. So the top attributes used by fans were exciting, technological, expensive. I agree with you on that one. Competitive and entertaining. Interesting enough, the word overtake actually dropped 10% from the prior survey in 2017. So
I mean, that used to be the thing. Was my God, give us some overtaking.
Yeah.
then that's what they gave us DRS.
Right. So that's for whatever reason, good, bad, and different, the word that people use to describe F1 word overtake is being used 10% less of the time, according to the survey.
I feel like part of that is like the promise of the 22 regulations, like, oh, that's supposed to give us more overtaking, so that just infers that we don't have it now, which is not wrong, but I think that's probably explains just from 2017 to now would be part of my explanation on that one.
Yeah, I agree with you on there. But hey, we've got between Vettel and Alonso, we've got 402 overtakes between the two of them, right? Something like that. So
yeah,
I still got to figure out how they come up with that.
Well, they posted something, and I tweeted about it. It said fortune favors the brave because it was Vettel versus Alonso done this many overtakes. But it was fortune favors the car that is better in race term than it is in qualifying. That's just they're just not qualifying where they should be technically, or the car's just better in the race than it is in qualifying. So that's just all right, whatever.
Yeah, it's kind of a neat point.
I've never liked the idea of this, but whatever.
Moving on to the calendar, there's a lot of interesting points here. 3/4 of the respondents live in a country where there is a GP. However, fewer than 20% have attended a race in the last 5 years. So I think certainly COVID has had an impact of that for sure. And then less than 13% have attended a non-home GP since 2016. It's surprising enough, even after the crowds we saw in COTA and the sellout now in Miami, the USA fans are apparently the least likely to attend their home GP, however, they did note that they believe that cancellations in 2020 were certainly attributed to probably some of that coming out in the survey.
Yeah.
So fans over 45 years old are twice as likely to travel international for a GP because it's so damn expensive. That makes total sense to me.
Well, yeah, I mean, they're the ones who can afford it.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's probably why, especially the U.S., you have all these younger fans coming in from Drive to Survive and they can't afford a ticket. So I guess it makes sense there. Yeah. But I mean, even COTA, I mean, $300 for general admission ticket, that's still very expensive to a lot of, especially younger fans. So I think that kind of makes sense on that U.S. Grand Prix number. I mean, also with COVID, but I think I would imagine the U.S. is a pretty young demographic with Drive to Survive.
It'll be very interesting to see if they do the survey again in 2 years or something.
Yeah, to see where this ends up.
In the US,
yeah.
Sure. And then fans are now willing to pay 20% more than they were in 2017 for a 3-day pass. So I think the average. And that's what
we just saw what happened with the Miami ticket prices.
But
that's
how many options
correct.
Are there outside of a 3-day pass? Oh.
I mean, you could get some 1-day passes. I know at COTA this weekend or for this last weekend because they opened them up. But usually it's the 3-day pass. Yeah.
But back in 2017, were there more options that were different? Do you remember?
I don't recall.
Okay.
I don't recall anything other than the 3 days.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you could get a single day race day. I mean, I take that back. I think in Monza when I went in 2017, I think it was. I think you could buy a Saturday ticket if you want to go in there. Take your kid and just get in there and see some cars run around for a few hours, see some sport races. But yeah, I think predominantly most people go for the 3-day.
Yeah.
And I think the pricing makes sense. It's for just a little bit more, it could get 3 days versus one. So I think the venues clearly want to push you towards that direction as well, based on their pricing strategy. So continuing on in the calendar, there's 16 core events that fans absolutely want to see, but there's 4 of them that are considered untouchable, as in they should never ever leave the F1 calendar. And I think one of these is definitely interesting to me. The 4 of these is Monza, no surprise, Spa, Silverstone, and then Monaco. Yes, Monaco. Even though it's the youngest survey they've ever had, most people are in their 20s. Only been watching F1 for a few years. Monaco is still an untouchable. I mean, I thought that was interesting.
Well, I think with the younger fans, it's great to see that. I mean, it's all the historic tracks, and they kind of make sense. But Monaco, I've known that the Monaco Grand Prix was a thing for as long as I can remember. It's just so synonymous with the sport, and if you know one thing about it, you know that the Monaco Grand Prix exists. And it's one of those kind of things where you see it in movie and TVs and all that stuff, and it just keeps recurring. So I think it's just so such a part of F1 that it literally is untouchable.
Well, and it gets profiled in how many different video games across how many different platforms. Yeah. I mean, your Forzas do it. I remember there was a Need for Speed game a long time ago when I actually used to play video games that had different variations of the Monaco circuit that you could play at all different times, and they would like cordon off part of it, and then okay, well you're doing this third or that third of it, and then other stuff. But
doing the Formula E circuit.
Yeah, kind of, sort. Yeah, exactly. And you literally kind of racing around it. They didn't call it Monaco, but you knew what it was. You knew what it was.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, as a race itself, it's not the best race. We all know that.
Yeah.
As an event, it's still a thing, and I think that's what this tells us is whether or not we like the race itself. Maybe your race is decided on that Saturday, and that's just how we go. But people want to still see that glitz and glam. That's still a thing. That's still important to the sport.
Yeah, and most of the people that know what it is, that can recognize it, don't actually care, I think, probably about the racing product. It's all the kind of diehard people that understand that that's not the greatest race. That's not the one that necessarily we want to go to, but that is the kind of high status, high ticket event. And like it always has been.
It's the crown jewel. It's the Daytona 500. It's the Indy 500. It's Le Mans. It's the crown jewel of the sport. So, yeah, I agree with you guys. That's a good point.
And as long as it's back on its proper weekend, when it should be on Memorial Day weekend, where you can have that, then the Indy 500, then if you still are so inclined, the Coca-Cola 600, and have 18 hours of motorsport in your life, then hey, do it.
Yeah, good point. Fans or races that fans want to see continue like annually, year in and year out. Australia, Brazil, Canada, Japan, and yes, the United States of America made the list there as ones that fans definitely want to see continuing to happen every year. Newer favorites that even though these really aren't new anymore, but I guess in comparison to 2017, Azerbaijan was a favorite. Abu Dhabi was really surprising me.
That surprises me too.
Yeah, maybe the event itself, perhaps, just the night race.
Is that all the...
Maybe it's a similar reason why Australia is so high. Like, that's the season opener. Like, I like Australia. I don't think it's my necessarily favorite track, but it's kind of the season opener big event that it is.
Yeah, I mean, as an atmosphere, Australia is great. Yeah. As a race, I mean, it's the most anticipated free practice I ever get up for is that practice because I want to see really where our order is.
Let's do this.
But yeah, exactly. And then you get into the race and you're like, well, there's like 4 overtakes if you're lucky.
But Abu Dhabi hasn't been halfway interesting since 2016.
Yeah.
So I don't understand why it's there. But I will say, I'm going to take this moment to kind of don't always trust these surveys because while we're talking about the calendar, one of the questions here was how many races would you like to see on the calendar? The options they gave were 4 races, 5 to 12 races, or 13 plus races. That does not allow you the nuance that everybody wants. Everybody enjoyed and loved the 17 race 2020. And you're not giving them the option to differentiate between any of that. It's just, okay.
We like 13 plus races. Yeah. So let's do 25.
Yeah. Like, okay.
Literally last night I had this conversation, and I was like, growing up, it was like 15 to 16-ish races every 3 weeks, and it was something special because you had to wait 3 weeks for the next freaking race. And you were just dying itching for it. And now we've got next year we've got 4 triple headers basically. It's going to be brutal for an F1 and certainly for a podcast. We're going to get the dirt lessons out down. But yeah, I don't know if it may just be more of just it's a year end. We always see the donuts out there at the end of the year. We crown the champion. The night race is a beautiful track. It's a stunning track.
I mean, they literally created it out of nothing. They literally built it, made an island out of nothing because they could. Does it need some help? Yes, but it's a hell of a thing.
I have high hopes for the reprofiling, but right now, Abu Dhabi, even with Azerbaijan and Singapore, not even close. Not even close.
Yeah, and Singapore was the last one, and I've told you before, Singapore is number 1 on my bucket list. I pray to God I can get there before they end that contract. It's just, that's always been up there. It's an incredible city, it's an incredible venue, and just the sound and everything else reverberating across the city. It's just a beautiful thing. So, and ones that returnees, I guess you should say, which some of these surprised me as well. Germany, France, Austria, Netherlands. Netherlands, that one, and Germany don't surprise me at all. France, I'm a little surprised by. But I guess.
Well, I wonder if that's not the track that we get, but the track that they want in what is it? What's it called?
Dijon.
Not Paul Ricard, but the other one, Magny-Cours.
Magny-Cours, yeah.
Yeah. And again, I don't know. I mean, I probably could have dug in even more to see how many of the French respondents were, but yeah, that one surprised me a little bit.
I mean,
the next two were Mexico and Hungary. We're up there.
One quick thing, Germany. I know there's a lot of fans that love those German tracks. That's always been kind of, especially lately, it's been really an F1 quagmire why they can't seem to make those venues in F1 work together. Because when they have them, they're very popular. But yet we've seen, even in the last maybe 5 years, some really empty grandstands in Germany. Now, obviously, the last time we were there was COVID, and they had to have empty grandstands. But it would have been interesting to see how they would have filled up Nürburgring last time they were there. So, yeah, I mean, I'd love to see Germany has some deep car history. I love it, but it's just been this F1 quagmire for a long time.
And you would think now, well, I mean, now we have Schumacher, Vettel's still there. I don't know. I would love to see Hockenheim come back personally, but
yeah,
we'll see.
This one I think was really interesting. China and Russia both scored very, very poorly amongst F1 fans. Both of them actually scored less than the Miami GP, which obviously has yet to even house a race yet. So fans aren't in love. I think China's a decent track. I mean, it's not something that I'm like, oh, we got to go to China because it could fall off the calendar and I wouldn't lose any sleep about it. But I feel like it is a decent track. Russia, obviously. In Sochi has never been great. We don't know what the new track is exactly going to play out. Fans just don't care about either one of those venues. Yeah. So that was pretty evident there.
I mean, Russia surprised me. I was just surprised that it wasn't, or China scored that low. Because, like you said, it is a track that has some characteristics, has some uniqueness to it.
Yeah.
I like the first little twisty bit.
Yeah, that turn, the section one. Sector one is very unique in nature. So,
but
it's one of the few with the.
Yeah.
It's not anything great. It's got a huge straightaway. So, I mean, it's almost interesting that you see tracks that Mercedes has dominated at, and I think Mercedes has had the run of China. They've definitely had the run of Russia. We know that. That I wonder if that maybe plays into it a little bit.
Certainly, because that moves into the next thing. There is the popularity contest. So for the first time, Max Verstappen takes the most popular driver. They talked about it pretty heavily at COTA while we were there amongst the fans in 2021, followed by Lando Norris at 13% and Lewis Hamilton at 12%. So they're very, very tight, 14, 13, and 12. Daniel Ricciardo was next at 10%, and Sebastian Vettel was at 8%. Max was number one in the United States, Japan, and Netherlands. Lewis, naturally, number one in the UK, Canada, and Brazil, of all places, which I thought was surprising. Just after
that's the Senna. That's the Senna.
Well, that's true, yeah. But I thought after 2008, I know,
Well, no, when he's not racing up against a Brazilian son, I think they like him.
Yeah,
and I think he earned a ton of respect for going through that. I think that's probably why he scores so high.
Very true. Let's see. Lando, most popular among female fans and fans between the ages of 16 and 24. I don't think there's any shock there. Also, probably not a shock as all of us are getting older. Hamilton's strongest among fans that are 45 and up. I'm not quite that old yet, but I can definitely see the old timers being more into Hamilton. Charles, George Russell, and Peter Gasly also scored well amongst our fans. Unsurprisingly, Mazepin scored even lower than the no favorite selection. I think they had you couldn't even barely even register a line for a Mazepin score there, so he scored that lowly. From a team perspective, McLaren is the most popular team now with nearly 30% of the votes, followed by Red Bull and Ferrari. This is the first time since they started doing this survey that Ferrari was not number one in the survey. So it's really interesting to see the shift in from the old school fans to new school and everything that goes with that.
I mean, 2019, they did damage.
Yeah.
You got all these new fans coming in, and then first thing they get introduced to is the cheating stuff. So
it's a lot of black eyes, yeah.
Well, proof that marketing and social media and active social media pay off, because Ferrari is one of the least active on social media, because they always never thought they ever had to do it. McLaren has been everywhere on social media. You can't go without seeing them sometimes. I mean, I even see commercials on other sports about McLaren and Cisco phones. So,
yeah, and obviously Red Bull, an iconic brand. We're world round, doing crazy stuff and stunts and jumping out of balloons in space. And it's a cool brand. Whether you like them or not, you got to admit they do well on marketing, to say the least. 50% of female fans rank McLaren number one due largely to their popular driver lineup, which is no surprising there. They're both guys that they're good-looking guys, and they do well on social media, and they interact well with fans, and they do everything right. So that's not surprising. And then Haas, of all teams, of course, was pulling at the rear by a long shot there.
I would have wondered where they would have. I just would have wondered where Haas would have scored without this current lineup, but with the lineup before.
Yeah,
and
that would be interesting.
The current livery. I mean, and just to see, there were literally next to no Haas fans at an American race.
Yeah, Chris and I we stopped counting. We got to 7 amongst the 3 days. Counted 7 people, individual people wearing Haas gear. 7 out of the 400,000 in attendance. And we found one booth that had a Haas hat for sale, and it was like a 2019 hat, and was shoved in the corner. I just happened to see it. It was literally like buried, under some other F1 generic gear. So yeah, they weren't even selling Haas. You could buy it if you wanted to. So that just kind of shows you that there's just no investment from social media standpoint or anything. And then last on the social media and kind of popularity contest, the drivers that do the most in social media, like you were saying, Andy, are the ones that score the best. Max, Lando, Lewis, obviously do a lot of social media. So the other thing is, let me see if I can find this here real fast. Oh, so in 2017, Lewis had 22% of the vote. Kimi in 2015 was the most popular at 14% of the vote, and then against Max at 14% of the vote. So it's interesting to see, while Lewis is still pretty even, he's come down a little bit, but he's pretty much level with where other drivers were in 2017. While Max is still popular, it's really interesting to see how so many other drivers now are also popular. Before it was, you had just a few drivers that really, the Kimmys, the Hamiltons really stuck out in the last few surveys. Now it's like there's so many fans that love so many drivers. And then we see that we like most of the grid, with the exception of Mazepin, there's very few drivers that I couldn't cheer for, So,
I mean, they've made a concerted effort amongst, I'd say, even in the last maybe 3 years of coverage that I've seen, like in the build up to some of these events, to get the drivers outside of their comfort zone. They put them in like the car. They do the hot laps with like Martin Brundle asking them rapid fire questions going at 200 miles an hour, or Kimi Räikkönen doing a lawnmower race, or all sorts of different stuff. I mean, you see the one of the more popular ones I know is the Lando and Carlos Sainz doing the milk spill thing in the car, and basically ruining the inside of a really expensive car. But it's all of those types of things is kind of before, other than the required questions from the media, these drivers wouldn't talk. They wouldn't say hardly anything. I mean, Kimi's popular because he doesn't, but with that exception, I think they've done a good job of getting these people to be likable and knowable amongst the fan base, and I think that's what you're seeing.
Yeah, and Deanna, you pointed on that in the NASCAR Weekly podcast, is just how engaged the drivers are and the teams are in comparison. There's certainly a few guys in NASCAR that do well on social media, but I mean, it's just a light and day difference. It's just every single day you can go out there. And one of the questions here, I don't have the exact number, I have to go find it, but I think it was like 35% of all the respondents said that they engage in some form of F1 media, whether it be podcast, YouTube, social media, or whatever, even on non-race weekends, which was a massive increase, obviously, as technology and apps change, of course. But I would love to see how that would compare to other major forms of motorsports. If it's a non-race week or off-season, I mean, how many times do I still check F1 Twitter during the off-season? It's every day. And I'm sure you just don't see that in other forms of racing, at least mostly so. And lastly, sporting regulations was a heavy talking point on this one, and I thought there was some interesting things here. 2/3 of all the respondents said that they are fully aware that F1, that their primary push is for sustainable fuels by the mid-2020s, and they also identify that sustainable fuels should be F1's number one priority. So a lot of fans are aware of the new technology. They know that F1 is a leader, and they've been a leader for decades now. And anything that's in your road car today, most likely started in an F1 car. And they know that F1 has a big push for sustainable fuels, and they want to see that continue. When it comes to climate change and things like that, it's obviously very important, especially with the younger generation. let's see, and that one actually was the outscored all other sporting considerations. Was that sustainable fuels for the mid-20s?
Well, and that makes sense because I mean, who wants to be the one that's touting? I'm the fan of the sport that's polluting our air and making things worse. When you've got, there's a climate change summit going on in Europe right now.
Yeah.
So I mean that makes sense, and everybody wants this to be right, and we're trusting that some of the smartest people in the world that are going to be able to solve this and do it in a way that makes us proud of the sport. I think they're on the right track of doing it. They're not there yet.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that if we have sustainable fuels
go ahead, Deanna.
That don't produce any pollutants, then surely we have no excuse not to just go back to the V8s at 20,000 RPMs. I mean, they're not producing any pollutants. I'd say let's let them scream again. But
you got my vote on that one.
Yeah, I think most fans would be on board for that one. Fans support less steward involvement, which I think is no surprise, except for in situations of dangerous driving. It's the only time that they really want stewards to be involved in the racing. As in previous surveys, fans that are over 35 years old continue to. There's a huge push in that population for tire wars to bring that back to have multiple tire manufacturers and refueling. Apparently, every single year, refueling is still popular. Again, I don't think it's ever going to happen again, but there is a massive push. It's heavily in
they're never going to do it with the cost cap.
Yeah.
They cannot do it with the cost cap. It costs too much money. Just those rigs that they had to set up.
Extremely dangerous.
Never going to do it.
At least. Moving on to sprint races. Sprint races were seen as marginally improving the show, but it was very predominantly clear that fans do not want them across every race.
Yeah.
Can we laminate that, please?
Yeah, I would also like to, because you just pointed out those other things, refueling, tire wars, and having a third driver were all more popular than sprint races. So do with that what you will.
Yeah, that's the next one. The fans predominantly are against artificial manufacturing or manipulation of races. No reverse grids, no success ballots that we've seen in other forms of racing, and they don't want technical freezes. They want to see teams pushing the envelope and not be penalized like they did with the DOS system, like F1 did with the pit stops with Red Bull. If a team perfects it and they're phenomenal at it, don't punish them. Just means the other teams need to step up and do better.
Exactly.
So, and then, you mentioned third drivers. That was third drivers and the ability to buy and run customer teams, just like straight out of the box, be a full-fledged customer. Here it'll be buy all my parts was big for the fans, even though probably something that's not going to happen. So there was some other stuff with gaming and some other things, that we could get into. But for the sake of time, I thought those were the big ones there. It was really interesting to see just a shift from years prior. And, as the data guy in me, I'm already itching to see what it'll look like in 2022 or 23 when we see this again, just to see how the shift is and how this younger generation has really changed the landscape really of the sport that we love. So.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to I said laminate that thing with the sprint races, and I'm reading, some of these rumor websites that say, they would eventually want the sprint to be the preferred format. No, please listen to the voice. It's not just the old curmudgeons that don't like it. And there's more engagement because people are trying to speak out against it. It's okay for some, but not for all. Please don't overdo it.
Yeah.
Remember my French silk pie theory. Remember that.
I feel like the sprint races, I don't know why there's just so much scapegoating into saying all of these younger fans want them when that's clearly not the case. I think that they just kind of want the money from having an additional big event at a weekend and all the sponsorship dollars and people that come with that, which is fine. Just, say that and don't blame this entire demographic of fans. It's like, what? This isn't what we exactly asked for or want. It's just... Yeah,
the very first bullet point is that this is the youngest, group of people that have ever filled a survey. And at the end here, we're wrapping up saying those people do not want sprint races. So, F1, you're going to have to start rewriting your narrative in a different way.
They were talking about how there's like 20 million data points. Not all data points are created equal.
Yeah, that's totally true.
And Deanna, you were talking about on the NASCAR Weekly podcast about like what makes why F1 is suddenly so popular in the U.S. With younger fans and things like that. And you had all kinds of good ones. Definitely go check that out. I want to guys or whatever word I'm looking for there of what Deanna said. But another one that popped up to me is the races are short. It's 90 minutes in and out. Like,
it's just not long at all.
I can't imagine doing what I did when I was younger and watching a 4 or 5 hour NASCAR race. I mean, with my life now, with family and things like that, there's no way in hell that I would ever be able to do that. But I can find an excuse to pull 90 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, if I didn't have to, jump into doing an agenda and getting ready to do a show that same night, I could have my F1 in the morning, take a nap, and be ready to do whatever I want to do with the rest of my Sunday.
Yeah, and
there's not a lot of other sports that let you do that. The NFL certainly doesn't even let you do that.
Yeah, and I would much rather take a longer race, like the full race with strategy and pit stops and all of that mess, than just 30 minutes of everybody just kind of running around in the same general order.
Right.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot there that, we've seen several NASCAR drivers have spoken out over the last couple of weeks about, hey NASCAR, we got to wake up. Your F1's doing something good. Let's start looking into it. And yeah, as someone who grew up diehard in NASCAR and been watching it my entire life and living in Charlotte and everything else, working for racing way back in the day, it's the amount of races, which unfortunately F1 is trending in the wrong direction here. Let's hopefully we wake up to that one. But the length of races, is just massive. I think.
Yeah.
To keep people locked in and engaged.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and one thing I mentioned about like NASCAR versus F1 is NASCAR is inherently pretty confusing what they have now with adding all the stages and the playoffs and all that stuff, which I'm not necessarily against the playoffs themselves. I think they've had some exciting stuff in the past few weeks here, but I think F1 is such an they made a very welcome space for new fans where it's very clear and easy to understand what's going on. Whereas I think some of these other motorsports can get pretty complex pretty quickly, and you need to have a certain like aptitude or like want to learn about it for it to fully make sense. Whereas I don't think F1 has quite as high of a barrier to entry as the other ones do.
And take it a step further, and you're seeing that in the growth of IndyCar.
Yeah.
Because that's even simpler. I mean, F1 has its own complexities, and it's part of the reason we love it. But you take that even a step further, and you have IndyCar, where it's guy go fast, wins the race.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it.
There's no MGUH and MGUK, and so from a technological standpoint, I agree with you. I mean, we see fans on the F1 side saying they don't want artificial manipulation of results. And I still, to this day, I think NASCAR playoffs is 100% that. When you've got a guy like Kyle Larson, who's dominated the season and barely escaping through a stage, a round of playoffs just because he has a bad night, it shouldn't be like that. And I've always been a fan of a guy that's consistent wins championships. The playoff system, the point system that they use, you win and you're in, but then you get stage points, and the stage points go to the playoffs, and then it's a lot going on there. And I don't think that trying to get the 4 quarters effect to compete with NASCAR or to compete with the NFL, I just don't think it's done well. And even in 2019, we were there. Chris and I were talking about this just the other day. NASCAR was in Texas that weekend in 2019, and we 100% would have drove down to Dallas Fort Worth and seen the race, but they did it on Sunday, and they competed with F1, which they lost. But why? From an attendance standpoint, why not do it on Saturday night? I would have been there 100%.
I can give you a 2-word explanation for that one. One of my least favorite guys in all of motorsports, Eddie Gossage. Guy's an idiot.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one. Yeah, 100%. But I'm like, we totally would have gone down there and made it a full race weekend, but it's just not thoughtful planning. Use F1 to your advantage, especially in the US, and correlate that. So we've seen them partner up with IndyCar since 2019. I think that's been a semi-successful platform, just kind of teaming up on weekends and things. But it'll be interesting to see. I'd love to see a NASCAR do something similar to this, to kind of see what the data out there is. And I'd love, as someone again who's watched the sport for 3 decades, to fill out my own NASCAR survey as well. So, but anyways, any final thoughts?
I mean, I think it shows that you've got an audience that's getting more dynamic. They're definitely more on more devices. They're younger. They're more trendy. They care about the environment, and they respect some of the history that's in this sport. So the kids are all right, I think, is the main theme I take away from this is, yeah, I mean, even from younger drivers to younger fans, this sport's only going to go up the more engagement that it gets, and it looks like they're going in the right direction. Overall.
Yeah, I agree with you. For me as well, like coming out of it, I think it's awesome. In addition to the young things, I think it's phenomenal to see the female engagement. We've seen W Series, we've seen the women in motorsports, we've seen content creators like Deanna have gotten massively into it. Compared to when I was a kid, you didn't see that, or at least it wasn't well known if there was any out there. The bullshit that I see on Twitter about, the girls are watching the sport because of the way the driver looks or something like that, that's garbage.
Not anymore. If that ever was a thing, that's not the case.
Yeah, I mean, I challenge anyone who has that ignorant attitude to go ask a female content creator about F1, and Deanna will school you all day, every day, and give you 40 years of history to go with it. So I think that it's crazy, but it's awesome to see just, the female engagement there, and that they've tacked in, and they're nerding out like we've been nerding out for years now. It's just cool as hell to see the popularity go across, all races and all genders and everything else in between. So I think that was kind of a big takeaway for me.
Yep, it's just amazing. I think just in general, especially the younger demographic, it's not something motorsports as a whole. If you would have asked me about 5 years ago, is it a thing that I thought would be A, this popular, or B, just like looking like it had a future to survive? I kind of felt like a few years ago it was on a downward trend, or that would have been my guess. So to see what Liberty's been able to do and kind of turn the ship around, and how that's spread out to other series as well, I think we're in a really great spot. And at the moment, it seems like it's only up from here.
Yeah. So just one last quick way to kind of bring this all together with everything we've been talking about. In 2014, I was at COTA. There was talk of the race possibly not happening. 3 or more teams were about to go bankrupt. I think we had a grid of 18 cars, and the sport looked like it was in real trouble. Compare that now to 2021, 140,000 through the turnstiles every day, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. This survey being more engaged than it ever has been, and viewership numbers going up through the roof. So, I mean, it's that quick that it can swing this way. And what this tells me is they better listen to this, because it could happen that quickly and back in the other direction if they screw it up.
Yeah, we've seen it happen in NASCAR. So hopefully it doesn't happen to our F1. But anyways.
All right.
Take it away, everybody.
Yep. So we will probably be back on Wednesday night with our Mexican Grand Prix race preview. For John and Deanna, it's been Andy. And as always, may all your laps be fast.